There is a place in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia called Abqaiq. It does not appear in travel guides. It has no famous monuments, no historic significance in the conventional sense, no particular reason for the average person to know its name. And yet Abqaiq is, by any serious measure of global economic vulnerability, the single most important piece of industrial infrastructure on the surface of the earth. More oil passes through the processing facilities at Abqaiq every day than the entire daily output of Iraq, Kuwait, and the United Arab Emirates combined. Roughly 7% of the world's entire oil supply, every barrel that reaches refineries in Asia, Europe, and America, is processed, stabilized, and prepared for export at this one facility, before it ever moves toward a tanker or a pipeline. In September 2019, drone and cruise missile strikes on Abqaiq temporarily knocked out 5% of global oil supply and sent crude prices to their largest single-day spike in 30 years. What Iran launched in the last 6 hours is not comparable to 2019. It is categorically, structurally, and strategically larger. And the world that existed before those missiles left their launchers no longer exists. To understand the scale of what has happened, you need to understand what Saudi Aramco actually is in the architecture of the global economy. Saudi Aramco is not merely an oil company in the way that Shell or ExxonMobil are oil companies. It is the physical infrastructure of global energy civilization. Aramco controls approximately 260 billion barrels of proven oil reserves, the largest single reserve position held by any entity on Earth, sovereign or corporate. It produces approximately 12 million barrels of crude oil per day at full capacity, which represents roughly 12% of all the oil consumed by every human being and every machine on the planet every single day. Its Ghawar field, the largest conventional oil field ever discovered, has been producing continuously since 1951 and remains the most productive single oil field in operation. Its Ras Tanura export terminal, which sits on the Persian Gulf coast approximately 60 kilometers north of Abqaiq, is the largest crude oil export terminal on Earth, handling 6.5 million barrels of export volume every day. When Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps fired a coordinated salvo of Kheibar Shekan ballistic missiles at these facilities in the early hours of this morning, it was not attacking a corporation. It was attacking the circulatory system of the global economy. Here is what the strike package looked like, based on the information now emerging from Saudi defense officials and from the satellite imagery that commercial providers have already begun releasing to intelligence subscribers. Iran fired an estimated 31 ballistic missiles in 3 coordinated waves from launch positions distributed across multiple provinces in western Iran and from IRGC-aligned positions in Yemen operated by Houthi forces, acting in direct coordination with Tehran. The first wave of 14 missiles was aimed at the Abqaiq processing complex. The second wave of 11 missiles targeted the Ras Tanura export terminal and its associated crude storage tank farm, a collection of enormous cylindrical tanks that together hold approximately 33 million barrels of crude oil in various stages of preparation for export. The third wave, the one that Saudi air defense was least prepared for because its trajectory was calculated to arrive during the engagement windows created by the first 2, targeted the Khurais oil field, the second largest producing field in the Saudi Aramco network, contributing approximately 1.5 million barrels per day to total Saudi output. Saudi Arabia's Patriot PX-3 batteries, supplemented by the THAAD systems that American forces have maintained in the kingdom since 2019, intercepted a significant portion of the incoming missiles. Significant is not total. Multiple impacts were confirmed at all 3 target sites. Abqaiq is burning. The Ras Tanura tank farm is burning. Khurais has reported multiple wellhead fires that field emergency crews cannot yet safely approach. The Kheibar Shekan missile, which has now been used in combat against Israeli targets, against Gulf shipping, and now against Saudi infrastructure in the space of a single conflict cycle, deserves specific technical attention because its capabilities explain directly why Saudi air defenses could not achieve a complete intercept rate. The name translates from Persian as Kheibar Conqueror, a reference to the 7th century Islamic battle that holds profound symbolic significance in Shia theology. But its military significance is entirely modern. The Kheibar Shekan is a solid-fueled ballistic missile with a range of approximately 1,400 kilometers and a circular error probable, the standard measurement of accuracy, defined as the radius within which 50% of rounds fired will impact, of approximately 30 meters. That accuracy figure places it in a category of precision that, a decade ago, only the United States, Russia, and China could achieve with ballistic missiles. It reaches peak velocity of approximately Mach 16 during its terminal descent phase. At that speed, the engagement window available to a PASI-3 interceptor battery is measured in single-digit seconds. The missile also incorporates a maneuvering reentry vehicle, a warhead that executes course corrections in the terminal phase, specifically designed to defeat the predictive targeting algorithms that Patriot and THAAD guidance systems rely upon. Saudi Arabia's air defense network is among the most sophisticated and densely deployed in the world outside of Israel. It stopped most of the missiles. Most was not enough. Now here is the number that every energy trader, every central bank governor, and every head of government with an economy exposed to oil prices needs to confront directly. Saudi Aramco's processing and export infrastructure, at the moment the missiles impacted, was handling approximately 9 million barrels of oil per day in export-ready form. The fires burning at Abqaiq and Ras Tanura have not yet been assessed for structural damage to processing equipment. That assessment cannot be safely conducted while the fires are active, and the fires at a crude oil processing complex of this scale can burn for days before suppression is complete. Based on the 2019 attack, which was smaller in scale and less precisely targeted, Aramco required approximately 3 weeks to restore full processing capacity. The current attack used more missiles, achieved more confirmed impacts, and targeted the export terminal in addition to the processing facility, a combination that the 2019 strike did not attempt. Conservative estimates from energy security analysts who have been briefed on the strike details suggest that Saudi export capacity will be reduced by a minimum of 4 million barrels per day for at least 3 weeks, with a meaningful probability of a longer disruption if structural damage to processing equipment proves more extensive than initial assessments indicate. 4 million barrels per day removed from global supply against a market that was already operating with minimal spare capacity buffer produces a price response that the models generate, but that policymakers struggle to say out loud. Brent crude opened this morning at $94 per barrel. Within 40 minutes of the first confirmed missile impact reports reaching trading desks in London and Singapore, it had crossed $140. It has not stopped moving. Here is what makes this strike categorically different from the 2019 attack in its geopolitical implications, beyond the larger scale and greater precision. In 2019, the strike was conducted using cruise missiles and drones launched from positions that the United States and Saudi Arabia attributed to Iran directly, but which Tehran denied, maintaining the fiction of plausible deniability that has governed Iranian proxy operations for decades. That fiction is gone. This morning's attack was claimed within 2 hours by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force in a formal statement broadcast on Iranian state television. The IRGC named the operation. It listed the targets. It published what it described as pre-strike surveillance imagery of Abqaiq and Ras Tanura. It stated explicitly that the attack was conducted in direct retaliation for Israeli strikes on Iranian nuclear infrastructure carried out with American intelligence support. And it stated, in language that Iranian strategic communications doctrine uses specifically when signaling that further escalation is authorized at the supreme leadership level, that additional operations against targets that support aggression against the Islamic Republic remain under active consideration. Iran has not merely attacked Saudi Aramco. It has signed its name to the attack, explained its rationale, and announced that it is prepared to do it again. The Saudi response, and the American response to the Saudi response, will now define the next phase of this conflict. Riyadh faces a strategic dilemma of extraordinary complexity. Saudi Arabia is not a party to the Israeli-Iranian conflict in any formal military sense. The Abraham Accords normalization process, which was moving toward a formal Saudi-Israeli normalization agreement before the current escalation cycle, has been in deep freeze for months. Saudi public opinion, shaped by decades of solidarity with Palestinian national aspirations and by the religious significance of Jerusalem to the kingdom's role as custodian of the two holy mosques, makes any overt alignment with Israel domestically toxic for the Al Saud family's political legitimacy. And yet Iran has now struck the physical infrastructure that generates the revenue upon which the entire Saudi state, the welfare system, the military budget, the Vision 2030 modernization program, the political compact between the ruling family and the population, depends for its existence. The Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, who has spent a decade consolidating personal control over every significant institution in the kingdom, now faces the most consequential decision of his political life. Respond militarily and risk a war that Saudi Arabia, for all its American-supplied hardware, has never demonstrated the operational capability to win against a determined Iranian adversary, or absorb the attack and accept the precedent that Iran can strike Saudi oil infrastructure with impunity. The United States military posture in the Gulf has shifted to its highest readiness state since the 2003 Iraq invasion. The USS Harry S. Truman Carrier Strike Group, which was operating in the eastern Mediterranean, has been ordered to transit the Suez Canal and proceed at maximum speed toward the Persian Gulf. B-52 strategic bombers have been repositioned from Diego Garcia to an undisclosed forward operating location. American Special Operations Forces at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar have been placed on the highest alert status. But the fundamental constraint that has shaped American decision-making throughout this entire escalation cycle remains in force. Military action against Iran, strikes on IRGC missile production facilities, strikes on launch infrastructure, strikes on Iranian territory, carries the immediate risk of Iranian retaliation against American bases and personnel that are physically present across the Gulf in numbers and locations that cannot be fully protected against the volume and precision of Iran's current ballistic missile arsenal. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs has delivered the same assessment to every administration for the last 8 years. A war with Iran in the Gulf is a war the United States can ultimately win, but not before absorbing casualties and economic disruption at a scale that American domestic politics has not been prepared for. That assessment has not changed. What has changed is that the crisis that assessment was always anticipating has arrived. China's position deserves specific attention because it contains the most significant potential variable in how this crisis resolves. China imports approximately 2 million barrels per day of Saudi crude, a volume that makes the kingdom one of Beijing's 2 or 3 most critical energy suppliers. Disruption to Saudi export capacity at the scale now underway produces direct and immediate consequences for Chinese industrial output, for Chinese inflation, and for the stability of a Chinese economy that is already managing structural slowdown pressures that Xi Jinping's government is deeply sensitive about. At the same time, China's partnership with Iran, including the basing rights agreement in the Persian Gulf and the weapons technology transfers that have materially enhanced Iran's ballistic missile capability, gives Beijing a degree of co-responsibility for what those missiles have just done to infrastructure that China depends upon for its own economic stability. This is the contradiction at the heart of China's Middle East strategy. You cannot be simultaneously the patron of the power that is destroying Gulf energy infrastructure and the partner of the states whose economic health depends on that infrastructure remaining intact. Beijing will be forced, in the next 72 hours, to choose which relationship it prioritizes. That choice will reveal more about China's actual strategic intentions than any diplomatic statement issued in the last decade. The final dimension of this crisis, and the one that will be felt most broadly and most durably by the largest number of people, is the inflation dimension. Modern industrial civilization runs on oil in ways that are not fully visible until the oil stops flowing. Every product that moves by truck, train, or ship embeds oil costs in its final price. Every piece of food produced by industrial agriculture carries the cost of diesel fuel, natural gas-derived fertilizer, and petroleum-based crop protection chemistry. Every pharmaceutical manufactured at industrial scale depends on petrochemical feedstocks and on the energy costs of production and cold chain logistics. When oil moves from $94 per barrel to $140, and the trajectory of current market pricing suggests it is not stopping at $140, the inflationary transmission into every other price in the global economy begins within weeks and reaches full expression within months. Central banks that spent 3 years engineering the most painful disinflation cycle in a generation, raising interest rates to levels that produced a wave of mortgage defaults, corporate bankruptcies, and unemployment across the developed world, now face the prospect of watching inflation re-accelerate from an entirely different cause that higher interest rates cannot address. You cannot raise interest rates to make oil wells that are on fire produce more oil. The policy toolkit that governments and central banks have available for demand-side inflation is irrelevant against supply destruction of this scale and this suddenness. Abqaiq is burning, Ras Tanura is burning, and the price of everything you buy everywhere on Earth just changed.